UFC 285 betting and DraftKings show. We have 14 fights this Saturday night. We got a stacked pay-per-view, the return of Jon Jones. I'm on a couple bets already, including an over that I don't think is going to be a popular bet this week. All that and then more on today's show. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. We're going to kick things off in the lightweight division as Loic Radzivov comes in as a minus 275 favorite. The comeback on Esteban Rybovix is plus 230. And this is one where Radzivov is actually coming in on short notice to replace Camuela Kirk, but he's coming in as a sizable favorite here at minus 275. And it's basically because he does seem to be like the more well-rounded fighter of the two, and certainly the more proven fighter of the two. He previously fought over in PFL. He's got a very lengthy career over there, and we've seen in multiple fights where he does go to the takedowns, can land takedowns at a high clip here. He's a good submission grappler as well. The one concern with him is the gas tank, because in a lot of those fights in PFL, he tends to fade as the fights get extended. Now, on the flip side, Rybovix fought on Dana White's Contender Series this past season. He's an undefeated prospect fighting out of Argentina. But as I said, coming into that matchup against Thomas Paul on my Dana White Contender Series video, he has yet to be tested against really any meaningful competition. And even though Paul seemed like he maybe could have gave him a go, the dude just doesn't have the durability. So seeing him be able to get that knockout victory in the first round was not all that surprising or impressive. And now he's going up against a guy who, despite making his UFC debut, I do consider him to be at the UFC level. So this is probably the toughest test for Rybovich here, and one that I'm not sure if he can pass without an early finish. And he does have power early. He likes that Kimura. That's one of his favorite submission attempts. But I just think Radzivov is well-rounded enough, a good enough grappler to be able to stay safe there and win this with his grappling of his own. So Radzivov by submission is the official pick. Next fight up in the bantamweight division, Farid Basharat comes in as a minus 410 favorite with Damon Blackshear on the comeback at plus 330. And Farid Basharat's the younger Basharat brother. Javid, his older brother, fights in the UFC as well. I think Javid is actually the more skilled of the two, but that's not to take away from the skill set of Farid, as he is an impressive prospect in his own right. He's 9-0, undefeated, but coming into that Contender Series matchup, one of the things I took away is that he has yet to really be tested against almost anybody on the regional scene, and he looked really good in his Dana White Contender Series fight. I think he can look good at the lower levels of the UFC, but I do have some concern seeing him blown out to this big of a favorite against somebody like Damon Blackshear, who at least we know has a competent ground game. He made his UFC debut on short notice against Youssef Zalal. He looked okay in that spot. I bet him there. Ended up being a draw mainly due to cardio, because he just didn't put enough activity out there and his cardio failed him. But regardless, he can land takedowns. He is a good submission grappler. Most of his wins have come by submission. I'm just not fully convinced that he'll be able to take advantage of Basharat on the ground, because Basharat does seem to have a pretty well-rounded ground game. So overall, I think this fight's going to play out closer than these odds indicate. I don't hate taking a small poke on the underdog in Blackshear, but the official pick is going to be Basharat by decision. Overall, in terms of DraftKings, I just think there's better fights to target on the card. Which brings us to our next fight in the women's strawweight division, as my girl Baby Shark Tabitha Ricci comes in as a minus 230 favorite with Jessica Penne on the comeback at plus 195. And this is one where I do like the Tabitha Ricci side. I'm not going to bet her at this number, but I do think she wins this fight because I think she's the better round winner. And I know I can rely on the way that she fights in order to win minutes here. And that's by closing the distance and landing takedowns. That's something that she's been able to do in all of her fights. That's something I expect her to do here against Jessica Penne, who only defends takedowns at 40% in the UFC. And while Penne is a black belt as well, maybe she can reverse sweep the smaller Ricci, be able to win some of these grappling exchanges. I just think over time, in the 15 minutes that we have here, I think more than likely half of that time is going to be with Ricci in dominant position here. So despite the concerns I have with Ricci on the feet, I just don't think Penne is much of a threat really anywhere the fight goes outside of her being able to pull off a submission or something, which I just don't think is all that likely. So I think Ricci wins rounds here, and I think Ricci gets her hand raised. Ricci by decision is the official pick. Next fight up, we have Cameron Simon, a minus 250 favorite with Mana Martinez on the comeback at plus 210. And Cameron Simon's a guy who I've historically not been super high on. I tried to fade him on Contender Series. It didn't work out against Josh Wong Kim. And then he followed that up with a UFC debut over Stephen Kozlo, where he did get the third round stoppage, but it was not all that impressive because he was taken down multiple times in that fight. I still have concerns with his defensive grappling ability along with his striking defense, because this dude gets hit with basically everything that his opponents throw, and that's somewhat of a concern against Martinez, who does seem to have some power. He's dropped multiple opponents here. He's 2-1 in the UFC. Now, those 2 victories were split decision wins over Guido Canetti and Brandon Davis, so it's not a great look for him, but I do think he has power on the feet. Where he struggles is I think he's not really much of a grappler either, but the cardio discrepancy, that's what I think is the biggest advantage in this fight towards Cameron Saaiman, because Saaiman, I know, is going to be able to carry his power for 15 minutes. I can't say the same for Martinez, as he seems to slow down in just about all of his fights. So I think Cameron Saaiman likely has to eat a few big shots early here, but then eventually is able to take over late and probably get a stoppage of his own. So we're going Saaiman by knockout. That's the official pick. Next up, we'll head to the welterweight division, where Ian Gary comes in as one of the biggest favorites on the card at -650, with Song Kenan on the comeback at +475. And this is a matchup where I just think it's a layup spot for Ian Gary. This is a guy who I'm not super high on, and I still have some concerns with his defensive grappling. I just don't think this is the matchup where that's going to be tested, because Kenan Song historically never looks to grapple. He's more of a power puncher, does have some knockouts on his record, but the durability is not quite there. He's been knocked out 3 times in his career, and if he plans on going toe-to-toe with a good striker who has power, who throws in high volume with solid cardio as well, who's also the more durable of the two in Ian Gary, I think Kenan Song's probably getting knocked out here. So Gary by knockout is the official pick. Next up in the middleweight division, Marc-Andre Barriault comes in as a small favorite at -125. The comeback on Julian, the Cuban Missile Crisis Marquez, is +105. And this is one where I think you have to back the better round winner in this matchup in terms of who you expect to win. And I think that's Marc-Andre Barriault here. Historically, he's a high volume striker. We know he has power as well. 9 knockout victories on his record. He's just a very well-rounded fighter. Doesn't really look to grapple a ton, but in terms of the striking exchanges, it's hard to outpoint him unless you're able to swarm him or hurt him like that Njokuanu fight. Now, his matchup against Marquez here is a favorable matchup because Marquez is just not a good round winner. This guy does have good finishing ability. All 9 of his wins have come inside the distance, but as you can see, the only 2 times he's gone to decision in his career, he lost both of them, and that goes back to his fighting style. The way that he fights is not indicative of winning rounds, and that's because he's low volume on the feet. He's got a powerful left hand, but if he's not dropping you or having big moments or knocking you out, then he's probably getting outpointed. And in terms of his grappling, he's not a bad submission grappler. He's got some decent chokes, but he's also not a guy that's going to push for takedowns, that's not going to wrestle aggressively. So he's just not a guy that has many ways to win rounds. And against a guy like Marc-Andre Barriault, who despite being finished a couple times here recently, I do still think he's pretty durable. I'd be surprised if Marquez is able to get him out of there. So I just expect him to be winning rounds here. I think he gets his hand raised. Marc-Andre Barriault by decision is the official pick. Moving on to the women's flyweight division, as Amanda Ribas comes in as a small favorite at -130 with Viviane Araujo on the comeback at +110. And this is one of my first bets this week. I bet Amanda Ribas -120 here. I do think this is a good matchup for her, despite both of these fighters being kind of similar to a degree. You know, they both have black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. They both average over 2 takedowns per 15 minutes. Both tend to get hit more than they probably should on the feet. But I actually think Ribas is much more defensively sound, whereas Araujo typically doesn't move her head at all, and she's just trying to wing these heavy shots and take her head off. And unless she's able to land some big shots and have big moments here, I don't think she's going to be able to win rounds, and I wouldn't be confident that she's going to be able to land takedowns and out-grapple Amanda Ribas. Historically, Araujo is not a good controlled grappler. She typically gets reversed or swept when she is in dominant positions on the mat, and those are against grapplers much lower to the degree of Amanda Ribas. So I expect if Ribas is taken down here to be able to work back to her feet or potentially earn some top time of her own here. And on the feet, I just think she's a better striker. I think she's going to get off on leg kicks. She fights a very smart game plan. So I think she's going to be dancing around the outside, much like Caitlin Chikagian did, who was able to have a lot of success doing that against Araujo, who again is just trying to move forward and swing her heavy shots. And the last thing I'll say is the cardio. I do favor Amanda Ribas here. We've seen Araujo historically struggle as the fight goes on, even in fights where she's having sustained grappling success, where typically fighters wouldn't be gassing out super heavy. After that grappling sequence, she gets up, she's completely tired. We've seen that multiple times now, and as she gets tired, her defense just becomes more and more non-existent, and the optics do not look good in her favor. So I think Amanda Ribas probably wins this one on the scorecards. Ribas by decision is the official pick. Which brings us to our next fight, as Dricus du Plessis comes in as a -240 favorite with Derek Brunson on the comeback at +200. And du Plessis is a guy who, despite the lack of striking defense, is a very potent fighter, a very dangerous finisher. 17 of his 18 wins have come inside the distance, and we've seen time and time again where he's going to throw caution to the wind and just do everything in his power to land one of those big shots and get you out of there. And where I think this is a good matchup for him, Derek Brunson is a great grappler, a good wrestler, one of the better wrestlers in the division, but the durability is a major concern. He's been knocked out 6 times in his career. Even when he's not getting knocked out, he seems to be wobbled, stunned, hurt, etc. And I think going up against a guy as dangerous and powerful as du Plessis, who does have good cardio as well, I think it's only a matter of time before they're at space and du Plessis is able to swarm him and land one of those big shots and follow it up and get him out of there. So du Plessis by knockout is the official pick, but I do think this is a good fight for DraftKings to target both sides, because in a world where Brunson is able to have sustained grappling success and not get knocked out here, he is going to score very well at a cheap price tag. So even though I think du Plessis by knockout is the most likely outcome, I'm going to have exposure to both sides on DraftKings. Next up, we have our featured bout on the prelims, as Cody No Love Garbrandt comes in as a -165 favorite. Trevin Jones on the comeback at +140. And this is one where I kind of teased it earlier. I'm on the over here, and I feel really good, probably more good than I should feel about this over, because when you look at this fight, the obvious concern and why I think a lot of books have it priced where it is because of the durability issue on the Garbrandt side. And I know this dude's chin is like complete dust at this point. He's coming off a first-round knockout against Kai Kara-France when he tried dropping down to flyweight. Now he's back up to bantamweight. Hopefully his chin is a little bit better, but honestly, I just don't think he has much of a chin at this point. He's been knocked out in 4 of his last 5 fights. He's lost 5 of his last 6. Like, the stuff on paper is not good, but the reason why I like this over still is because historically, while the skill set is there in terms of Garbrandt, the volume really never is. He's a good boxer. He's got sharp leg kicks as well. Solid wrestler, even though he doesn't go to that as much as he should. But he's very timid, especially recently, because he knows that he really doesn't want to get baited into a brawl because he can't eat those punches like he used to. So he likes to stay on the outside, low volume, stay at range, stay safe, don't get in the pocket where you're going to get clipped with some big shots. And on the flip side, Trevin Jones, yes, this is a step down in competition for Cody Garbrandt, but it's also a stylistic similarity in that Trevin Jones is historically very low volume on the feet. This guy's naturally a counter striker who only is averaging a little bit over 2 significant strikes per minute. He's not putting a ton of volume out there. He's actually more of a grappler. He holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Robert Drysdale, but he doesn't really look to wrestle either. So I could just see this one turning into a staring contest where both of them want to stay safe at range, not put a ton of volume in there, not take a ton of chances either. So I just really think this is a low volume, boring-ish fight where, even though I acknowledge the durability issues of Garbrandt, I still would be surprised if Trevin Jones was able to get him out of there. Jones does have a little bit of power because he's shown us that in the UFC, but he's not like this massive one-hitter quitter type of guy. You know, prior to the UFC, he had 1 knockout victory, and that was against a guy with a losing record on the regional scene that had been knocked out like 9 times before. So let's not pretend that this dude is like Francis Ngannou out there. So even though Garbrandt's chin is dust, I still don't rate a Trevin Jones knockout really all that highly. So I just think this one is going to be low volume, staring contest for the most part. I think it soars over the 1.5 point mark, and I think it goes over the 2.5 mark as well. Cody Garbrandt by decision is my official prediction. And in terms of DraftKings, because I think this one's going over, and because I think it's not going to be fought at a high pace, I don't think there's going to be a lot of points scored in this one either way. I think it's going to be way over-owned relative to how I think this fight plays out. So even though I think these guys are going to be kind of popular because of their inside distance lines and the durability issues, I'm going to be way underweight. I might not even have either of these guys, depending on how many lineups I make this weekend. So that's kind of my contrarian approach to DraftKings this week. I'm going to be way under on this fight. I'm betting the over 2.5 at plus 160. I bet it for over 1.5 units. I'm going to be betting some other type of over action. I'm hoping to get Garbrandt by decision at a better than plus 500 number once FanDuel releases those props. So keep an eye out for that as well. I like Cody Garbrandt by decision in this one. And kicking off the main card, we have the highly anticipated UFC debut of Bo Nickel. He's a minus 1,400 favorite. That's the biggest betting favorite on the card against Jamie Pickett on the comeback at plus 850. And for those that don't know, in case you've been living under a rock, Bo Nickel is the next big thing in the UFC. We saw him on Dana White Contender Series twice this past season. He got the finish in round 1 the first time around. They brought him back for another fight in week 10, got the finish in the first round again. So he's very green. He only has 3 professional fights, and he's never fought. His longest fight was 1 minute and 2 seconds. So there's clearly like some questions regarding this man's cardio, but he wrestled at a very high level. He's probably the best wrestler on the UFC roster, maybe the best wrestler the UFC has ever seen. So that's a lot of respect for somebody who is very green, only 3 fights. But I think this is a tailor-made matchup for him against Jamie Pickett, who only defends takedowns at 65%. We saw him taken down multiple times by Kyle Dawkins. We've seen him submitted before as well. I think Bo Nickel lands takedowns here at will and eventually gets a first-round finish. His round 1 prop is juice past like minus 200. So he is an obvious safe play, high floor, high upside play on DraftKings. Despite the expensive price tag, I'm going to have a lot of my guy, the Penn State grad Bo Nickel, this weekend. Next up, we have a banger matchup between Mateusz Gamrot, a minus 170 favorite, with Jalen Turner on the comeback at plus 145. And this is a really fun matchup. One I love on DraftKings because even though we have 14 fights on this card, a lot of them, as you've heard, I'm not super interested on DraftKings. I expect a lot of decisions on this card. This is one where even if it does go to decision, which I'm not predicting it will, but even in that scenario, I think the winner scores well here because I do think this one's going to be fought at a very high pace. I think Mateusz Gamrot is one of the best wrestlers in this division. He averages over 4.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. And on the flip side, Jalen Turner is a very dangerous dude. 9 of his 13 wins have come by knockout. He's very big and long for the division and super powerful early while the fight plays out at range. He's got a lot of tools with the knees and elbows that could give a guy like Gamrot, who's not the best striker, it could give him some fits while the fight plays out at space. But the thing that I keep going back to is the wrestling, the relentless mat returns by Mateusz Gamrot here. We've seen Jalen Turner get wrestled in the past. You go back a couple years, Matt Frivola took him down 4 times. He was taken down by Jamie Malarkey despite dominating the striking in that fight. He was still taken down and controlled towards the end of the round there. Mateusz Gamrot, I think, is going to be able to rack up multiple takedowns in this spot, and eventually the pace is going to break Jalen Turner here. So I think Mateusz Gamrot gets a late finish. Gamrot by TKO is the official pick, but I'm not ignoring the finishing potential of Jalen Turner either. So it's one where I think the winner scores well either way. You're going to want both sides on DraftKings across multiple lineups. Next fight up, we have Shavkat Rakhmonov coming in as minus 500 favorite. The comeback on Jeff Hands of Steel Neal is plus 400. And this is one where I'm pretty sure I'm going to have some type of Jeff Neal action this week. I'm just not quite sure when I'm going to get involved here for a small poke on the underdog. And it's not that I think Rakhmonov isn't a very good fighter, because I do think he is a very impressive prospect and I think he has a bright future in the UFC. But he's also a 16-0 fighter. All of his wins have come inside the distance. He's low volume on the feet, despite the strong grappling game and the 8 submission victories on his record. I still have some concerns in fights where people are going to be able to stay alive in those and make him fight at range and be able to push this fight out of the first 2 rounds. I just think I have some questions that I want answered here. And as he starts to face much better competition in this division, I think we're going to get some of those answers. And this could potentially be one of those spots, because Jeff Neal historically has had very good takedown defense. He stuffed all 7 of Belal Muhammad's attempts a couple years ago. He stuffed most of Neil Magny's attempts. 2 of 10 Neil Magny went. And I know Neil Magny will look at that fight. Neil Magny won that fight and ended up getting ran through by Rakhmonov. So I know the level of grappling is certainly a difference there, but I'm just making the case for why Neal should not be this big of an underdog. It's possible that Rakhmonov is going to be able to just clinch him up, take him down, and control him, and eventually submit him. And I do think that probably is the most likely outcome. But I think at range, I favor Jeff Neal here. I think he's definitely going to be throwing more volume out there. I think he carries more power in his punches as well. He just needs to be able to avoid those clinch scenarios, avoid getting taken down here. Do I think he does that? Probably not. Do I think he could do that? Absolutely. And at this big of a number, I think I'm probably willing to take a small chance on that. But overall, I think Rakhmonov by submission is going to be my official prediction for this one. In terms of DraftKings, again, this is one I think you're going to want both sides. There's not a ton of underdogs that I love this week. I think Jeff Neal could be one where if he wins, he probably ends up breaking the slate. Which brings us to the first of two title fights. We have Valentina Shevchenko, minus 600 favorite, with Alexa Grasso, the challenger, on the comeback at plus 450. And this is a matchup where I think you have to favor Valentina Shevchenko for the simple fact that not only is she a very technical kickboxer, but I think one of the biggest advantages in this fight is going to be her physicality and her ability to land takedowns here. And as we've seen with Alexa Grasso, that is historically the way that you beat her. She was taken down multiple times in that Carla Esparza fight. She was even taken down multiple times in her last fight against Viviane Araujo. The problem is Vivi just wasn't able to do anything with those takedowns, whereas I think if Shevchenko takes her down, she's going to be able to control her on the mat for extended periods. So while I think the striking is pretty even, I just think the physicality and the takedowns and the grappling of Shevchenko are going to be the difference here. So we're going Shevchenko by decision. That's the official pick. It is a 5-round fight, so the upside is there for volume. I'm not going to shy away from this fight completely, but it's also not one, because I don't really see a finish happening, it's not one that I'm jamming in either, if that makes sense. Which brings us to our main event, as Jon Bones Jones is making his highly anticipated return to the UFC octagon. He's a minus 155 favorite with the comeback on Ciryl Gane at plus 135. And obviously, we can speculate what we think Jon Jones is going to look like here, but he's coming off a 3-year layoff. He's also moving up from light heavyweight to heavyweight, so he's going to be adding an extra 30 to 50 pounds to his frame for this fight, which I'm not sure is a good thing. And he's fighting one of the better heavyweights on the roster in Ciryl Gane, who's a very technical kickboxer. He's very powerful as well. And I just think the way these two match up is very interesting to me, because Ciryl Gane is kind of similar to Jon Jones in his striking style, in that these guys like to stay at range and stay safe and use their length and their kicking attack. And I think both of them are going to look to do that here in this matchup, so it might play out a little bit more boring than some people would want. Now, where the upside is and why people are backing Jon Jones at a favorite price tag here, despite all of those question marks, is because Jon Jones historically one of the better wrestlers in the light heavyweight division. We'll see if that's going to translate to the heavyweight division, but if he is able to land takedowns here, that's where he can really pay off this price tag, because as we saw, Ciryl Gane was taken down 4 times by Francis Ngannou, who up to that point had never really shown much of a wrestling game. So if Jon Jones is able to go to that wrestling, that's where I think he could have big success here. But I'm also not convinced that he will be able to have that type of success, because he really hasn't gone to the wrestling a ton recently, and when he has, again, it's against much smaller guys. Ciryl Gane has a massive frame. I'm sure he's been working on his takedown defense all camp. He brought in some credentialed grappler as well to train with him for this fight against Jon Jones, so I'd expect him to be ready for that grappling approach of Jon Jones. And on the feet, I think it's super even. And because of all those question marks, it just adds a layer of uncertainty and variance in this matchup. And as you know, variance almost always favors the underdog. So this is one where I'm probably just going to take whoever's plus money. And in this case, it's going to be Ciryl Gane, because all of that public love is coming in on Jon Jones. I haven't bet Ciryl Gane yet, but I'm likely going to take a 1-unit play on the money line if we see him get to like the plus 160 range come fight time, and I think we do based on how this line movement is going. So it's one that I don't feel super confident in. I think it's going to be a competitive, close-ish fight. I'm just willing to bet against all of those question marks, because I think Jon Jones is being priced as if he's just as good as he was, if not better, considering all those question marks, I think it's a bad idea here. So give me Ciryl Gane by decision. That's the official pick. In terms of DraftKings, I don't love this main event. It's not like a Krylov Spawn spot where even though they didn't end up fighting, I thought that was a great fight to have exposure to both sides and have exposure to it in just about all of your lineups. This one, I think you could have exposure in some of your lineups because they are priced favorably in that mid-range, so it's not going to take a ton to pay off that salary. But on the flip side, if this does turn into a staring contest, which I think it could have the possibility to do, there might not be a ton of volume. And if Jones doesn't land takedowns here, it could be a spot where both guys kind of end up underperforming relative to expectations. So it's one where I'm going to have exposure in some, but not all of my lineups this Saturday. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings broken down by salary tier. It'll have ownership projections as well, a bunch of other stuff. It's all completely free, fightnumbers.com. This Friday night, I'll be joining Brett Appley and Sun Tzu on their Creating Alpha show on YouTube. I'll be sure to tweet out that link to it on Friday evening where we discuss the DraftKings slate in lengthy detail, and I can't wait for it. It's going to be an awesome show. Be sure to tune into that. Thanks for the support. If you didn't already, please like this video and drop a comment below. I definitely appreciate it, guys. And as always, thanks for watching. Best of luck, and we'll see you guys next time.